In his November 2017 blog article for Cool Green Science, author Ted Williams declared that the rhesus macaques on Isla Desecheo were functionally extinct, if you don't count a single aging female. Our first view of Isla Desecheo was from Rincon at the lighthouse. It looked amazing. It's about 12 miles directly west of Rincon, and Jay and I finally made it out there on the boat to look at this crazy place. There are blowholes around the coast, caves all in the rock structure. The water right up to the island is 40 feet, and there's only a couple of places where you could put a small boat in. It has no natural water. It's basically barren. There's scrub trees, grasses, 3 resident lizards, and according to reports, in 1912, there were thousands of nesting seabirds that inhabited the island at least part of the year. The reports of the birds are sketchy, but enough that President Taft made it a seabird sanctuary in 1912. I don't know how the military got permission to drop bombs on it and do research there, but that's what happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to start the story at the beginning. So this story really starts in 1936, before World War II. Rhesus macaques were being used for multiple research studies because they share 93% of human DNA. The rhesus macaque was ideal for research because of its small size. And prior to World War II, they were able to get specimens easily and inexpensively from primarily India. But in 1936, they decided World War II was looming. The 4 main researchers looked for grant money from several institutions that used the rhesus for their research, and were able to find enough money to get together a group and go to India and collect the necessary specimen. They went to India and got 500 and some rhesus and caged them, tested them for tuberculosis. They went from India to New York, dropped off several of the rhesus macaques there, and then got a steamer to bring the rhesus still in cages to Cayo Santiago on the east coast of Puerto Rico. Cayo Santiago had been used for raising feral goats. The family was willing to donate the island to the research colony, and it was going to be based and managed through the College of Tropical Medicine at the University of Puerto Rico. So with all that in mind, and while they were preparing for these rhesus macaques to come and set up housekeeping on Cayo Santiago, they took all the feral goats off the island. They planted what they thought would be fruits and vegetables, something sustaining that would feed the rhesus, and they were setting up a free-ranging colony. When they brought the rhesus to Cayo Santiago, they tested them for tuberculosis again, before releasing them into the woods and sort of jungle area that is there on Cayo Santiago. The Cayo Santiago primate center was low priority during World War II, and before the end of it, they were willing to sell. When this came to the attention of Dr. Frontera, as he finished his PhD work, he brought new research to the island and was able to save it. After the war, the monkey chow was developed. Water fountains of a sort were installed so the monkeys could get fresh water, and they were all pretty happy. The animals were all tattooed. Ears were notched as necessary to identify them, so they could say during a census they would feed them the monkey chow in areas where they could stop, count them, look at them, assess their health without actually having to be too tactilely involved. A group of psychologists decided that the rhesus macaques were so useful in research that we didn't really know enough about their social life and their social behavior to make sure we had a consistent view of what they were doing. And so besides the fact that they were blood-wise similar and DNA-wise similar to us, they wanted to see socially how they interacted with each other, and were there any human traits that these monkeys exhibited. NIH gave a grant to John A. Morris and Emil Menzel Jr. to study adaptation of the rhesus macaques. The macaques were all in groups they called troops, and they took Troop H, which wasn't the top group and it wasn't the bottom group. It was sort of in the middle in the macaque social status. 83 members, and they at first decided they brought in the ones that they could get in this troop, feeding them, and they left 23 of the group on Cayo Santiago, and 57 were brought to an island on the west coast of Puerto Rico. The adaptation study was to see if, in the course of disrupting the family unit that was Troop H, what the hierarchy would do, which male dominant, male ranging, female dominant groups and mother-baby groups would stay together or separate, and how that would all work. Usually a troop is around 200 animals, and if it gets to 200, the adult females will take their daughters and granddaughters and go off and form a new group, and an adult male will come and join them and form a new social group. Would that happen again when they move them? And what would happen to the social status of the monkeys on Cayo Santiago? Well, we're here to talk about Isla Desecheo. So I'm going to give you some of the history that you may or may not know. Isla Desecheo was discovered off of Puerto Rico on Christopher Columbus's second voyage into the New World. That was in 1493. It was a barren island. It was considered a dry forest. The amalgo tree, cactuses, grasses, and several other trees that we find on Puerto Rico were there. The whole backstory starts for us in 1898. Puerto Rico became a territory of the United States. In 1912, after there were many observations of the seabird nesting areas on Isla Desecheo, the island was declared a seabird breeding preserve by then sitting President Taft. In 1937, President Roosevelt transferred management of the island back to the government that was in Puerto Rico. World War II started in 1939, and in 1940 through 1964, Isla Desecheo was used for bombing target practice. They did survival training and then bombed crap out of the whole area around Isla Desecheo. To this day, they say there may be unexploded ordnance on the island, and it's illegal to go walk on the island and do anything unless you're with a government official. In 1966, Menzel and Morris started their study. They took 57 of the 83 monkeys in Troop H and put them on the island. My issue is not the social status of these Rhesus macaques, other than that they are highly social, highly family oriented, and that the females are the matriarchs, and they maintain their status over the years because of their birthright and their birth line. So if your mother was an important monkey in the troop, her daughter is also going to be an important, higher ranking monkey in the troop, like that. So when they took them to Desecheo, the monkeys had been well fed with fresh water, activities, and in a really controlled environment, even though they were technically free-ranging on Cayo Santiago. Historically, the 358 acres of barren hills and valleys were home to 11 different species of nesting birds. Like I said, in the early 1900s, when we first obtained Puerto Rico, they said the birds numbered in the tens of thousands. But bombing and drought and hurricanes tend to decrease the population wherever you go. The 11 species of birds, 3 species of lizards that are specific to Desecheo, and then 1 cactus that it's not specific to Desecheo. Higo chumba cactus is on Monito, Isla de Morris on the south coast, and used to be prevalent in the Ponce area, but there's no specimens of it naturally found on the mainland of Puerto Rico now. As early as the 1500s, when Spanish and Portuguese explorers were traveling around, they decided that Desecheo was far enough from the mainland that only someone with a ship could get there, and it would be a good place to put goats. Goat meat is highly nutritious, and they can eat anything. So they started leaving goats on the island and created a feral population. I'm not sure how many were the numbers, but a feral population of goats lived there. And the goats ranged and ravaged and ate pretty much everything they wanted to. From the early 1500s, we saw the goats there in 1900 when we surveyed the island after it became our property. There were also black rats, Rattus rattus. We all know rats have been documented and anecdotally reported on sailing ships for as long as we can remember. Rats leaving a sinking ship, rats climbing up and down the lines that hold the boats. We've all seen these stories and reports. And rats will eat anything, just anything. And they're known egg and bird eaters. They would kill young birds, they will kill and eat eggs all day long. It's a preferred food. They're not stupid. Eggs are good. I mean, maybe it was a rat that first decided who should eat that thing that comes out of a chicken's butt. I don't know. Anyway, so rats were a problem, goats were a problem, hurricanes were a problem. But as time went on, and the research on these monkeys only saw the researchers do 8 visits to Isla Desecheo to survey the monkeys. By 1970, they were done. By 1970, 69, 70, 71, Peter Warshall was there doing other studies and anecdotally wrote about the Rhesus macaques, saying that he saw the macaques push birds off their nests to take their eggs and eat them. I find it hard to believe because all the other reports of the Rhesus macaques are that they couldn't stand the smell of the guano. It's pretty disgusting. And they didn't want anything to do with the areas where the birds were nesting. But up until this point, there's very little documented evidence. It's all anecdotal about how many birds were actually there. The brown boobies, the blue boobies, the red boobies, the shearwaters, frigate birds. red-winged blackbirds, all kinds of different birds that were in and out and around there. The numbers are not really accurately reported. And during that time when birds were leaving Isla Desecheo, there were documented droughts. And if you don't have enough to eat when you land on an island, you're not going to stay there and lay eggs. And the droughts affected all the islands around the Caribbean, from St. John and St. Thomas and the areas there where the birds nested, all around Culebra, Culebrita, Vieques. All those islands had a decrease in nesting seabirds. Now that's probably about the same time in the United States we had a decrease in osprey, but that was DDT. And was farming in Puerto Rico putting DDT into the water so that the birds that did nest, their eggs wouldn't hold? Goats were removed from the island and eliminated by 2009. The Rhesus were poisoned and killed, and the last evidence of them on the island was 2016. I personally owe my life to rhesus monkeys. In that, because of our similar DNA between humans and the non-human primates, the antigen identified as rhesus factor was discovered when they gave monkey blood to rabbits and then people blood to rabbits and blood transfusions. The ABO blood typing was done, and then the rhesus factor was determined because people were still dying after blood transfusions. The rhesus factor antigen determined parental blood mixing. And so if your mother was a negative blood type and your father was a positive rhesus blood type, and there was any mixing of the blood in utero, the antigen would cause a reaction and the baby would be stillborn. And so myself and my siblings owe our lives to this rhesus factor being discovered. In 1940, when this was discovered, many lives of our soldiers were saved because blood typing in the military was more accurately screened, and victims of war wounds who required blood transfusions weren't dying as regularly because of the rhesus factor being determined. In other research, the rhesus monkeys were directly responsible for several vaccines. Vaccines for rabies, smallpox, polio, and the antiretroviral medication that's being taken today by patients with HIV and AIDS is all as a result of research with the rhesus macaques. They were also the first primate, non-human primate, in space. So in 1976, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Commission assumed control of Isla Desecheo. By 1977, it was determined that they were directly at fault for the lack of nesting seabirds. Despite the bombing, despite the rats, despite the goats eating everything, it was the rhesus who were responsible, and they had to be removed. This is an elevation map of the island based on a satellite imagery to show you where the high areas were. This map shows you where they're trying to lure the birds back to, and I assume those were the old nesting areas. One of them is right at the helipad. And this map shows you the path that the rhesus macaques traveled day and night, day and night, day and night, and where they lived the majority of their life. Very little overlapping with the birds. So the efforts began to trap and remove the rhesus monkeys. They attempted a removal in 1977, they attempted in 1979, 1981, and then consistently from 85 to 87 because funding was better, and then they had to drop it off, and then again in 2009 to 2015 they made more attempts. In the early years, they said they removed 155 rhesus macaques. Now this is 10 years, because the 55 monkeys were put there in 1966. So 1977, so 11 years, 12, 13 years, they tripled their numbers. The next effort removed 66 monkeys. So that's almost quadrupling their numbers. Despite the 2 or 3 that are documented to have died, they continue to reproduce and breed and do their thing. There was one anecdotal note, though, that because of the harshness of the environment, the mothers were spending less time with their babies, nurturing. They would nurse them, but nurturing them and carrying them around, they spent less time doing. And that the babies spent less time playing than the similar aged babies on Cayo Santiago. The stress of having to eat bark and leaves and drink water out of a pond and not being fed definitely stressed them out more, though, than in the wild. The early stages, they trapped the monkeys. I cannot find in any of these groups anyone who will say what was the determination. Were the monkeys sent back to Cayo Santiago? No one there will answer my phone or my emails. Were they sent to other areas for other research? Can't figure it out. The Fish and Wildlife Department routed me all the way to a woman in Georgia who answers the phone, who did some work and research, gave me one paper that I already had, but no one wants to talk about where the monkeys went. Even island conservation. In 2009, Island Conservation, a group who has been saving islands from alien and invasive species all over the world, was given the chore of taking on Isla Desecheo. Because their efforts to trap more monkeys were not good, they hired and collaborated with a group called White Buffalo. White Buffalo is a group of animal control experts that take care of deer populations when they overrun areas and they overrun gardens. Deer in the U.S. can be a nuisance because not enough people hunt them anymore, and they keep reproducing. But these White Buffalo hunters brought night vision, thermal scopes, and high-powered rifles to eradicate the remaining animals that were left on the island. Exact numbers aren't known. It's said on Cayo Santiago they reproduce at a rate of 83%. So the exact numbers to me aren't known. But like I said in the very beginning, they did a functional extinction of Rhesus macaques on Isla Desecheo if you don't count one aging female. Was it a tattooed female from the original group? In some places they say these monkeys can live 40 years, and that would be within the bounds. Some places say they only live 30 years, from 66 to 2015. That would be a stretch, especially with the harsh conditions. So an aging female could have been one of the babies born there, could have been a baby born later. Was it a tattooed monkey? Is it a monkey that we know? And did they collect the bones? Because they have a huge bone collection of Rhesus macaques at the University of Puerto Rico. But I can only get a busy signal and no response to any email from them either. Of all the agencies and all the people involved, no one will return my call, no one will return my email, and they left one of a highly social group of animals, one female, on the island. Photobombed by the dog. I have to say, it breaks my heart to know that one aging female is there. Are the birds coming back? Yes, to a small degree. They're saying it's successful. There's going to be years before they get research, but there are other islands where near Barbuda and Antigua, where the goats and rats were eradicated, and within a year all the seabirds came back. Those islands weren't bombed like our island was, and they didn't have all the warfarin poison sprinkled all over to kill the rats. They used a different type of poison that dissipated. There's islands all over the world with goat and rat and cat and dog problems. Here in Puerto Rico, we have wild colonies of Rhesus macaques. The suggestion is that the years of famine during World War II caused these macaques to swim to shore for food. They're strong swimmers. They like the water. Hurricanes damaged the facilities in La Peguera and other facilities to the point that the Rhesus macaques escaped. I have a friend in San Juan who has them in her garden, in her backyard, so that's an issue. So the Rhesus are highly adaptable, not in the way Morris and Menzel wanted to prove, but they've proved they can live anywhere from the Himalayas to India to the desert in Afghanistan. And they prove they can survive and thrive on Isla Desecheo. I don't think they hurt the seabirds, but that's just my opinion. I think they shouldn't have been murdered. I think they should have been left alone till there was more evidence. Because all these things are coming back. All the plants are coming back. The grounds are so thick with plants you can barely walk through there. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.